Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. I would like to talk about speculation and its cause in the crisis, looking at how brands and marketers can adapt to the environment, and also we'll talk about how consumers are changing as a result of the impact of the financial crisis that has been felt around the world. To begin, we're going to look at an old story about speculation. Back in the 1600s, there was the story of the Dutch tulip bulb market craze. At this time in the 1600s, there became a frenzied excitement to purchase ordinary tulip bulbs. And at the time, the market became so overheated that some of the bulbs were selling for $1,000 each until, not surprisingly, the market collapsed. This left many Dutch business people in ruin and many people throughout Europe. But it was a timely reminder of the speculation that exists in markets and the natural tendency to overinflate the value of an asset. And that is exactly what we found when we started to do our research in the middle of 2006, looking at a phenomenon that we called the brand bubble. What we found was that intangible value had increased dramatically around the world. In fact, almost 2/3 of the value of what we make across markets is intangible. It's in ideas, in intellectual property, and in brands. And at the same time, the value of brands had exploded over the past 30 years, becoming almost 1/3 of all enterprise value of the average company in the S&P 500. So we begin to learn that brands are very big business. And yet, when we look at the size of some of the value of these brands, it's amazing. If you step back and think about them as a sector of our economy, you see how important they are. So for example, the top 100 and 250 most valuable brands are worth nearly $2.2 trillion. Now to put that in perspective, that's larger than the GDP of France. Brands also, looking at the top 10 most valuable brands, are worth more than 70% of the market capitalization of US companies. Enter the brand bubble. In 2006, even while the market was exploding and people were very infatuated with the stock prices of companies and the values of brands, we started to see a very troubling pattern in the data. The data said that there was a difference between Wall Street's expectations of brands, what the financial markets and what business was valuating brands, versus the consumer. And this gap, this profound gap that we found in our research through Brand Asset Valuator, became the foundation for our research. Some of the things that we found is that even while market value had increased over 30% of the value of brands, there were some dramatic differences happening if you talk to the consumer. So brand esteem, which is, do I like this brand, was down 12%. Brand awareness had declined by 20%. Product quality associated with brands was down 24%, and trust in brands had declined nearly 50%. Now, a couple of the other things that we found in this research showed that nearly 90% of brands had lost differentiation. When we looked at not only the BAV data, but other data from other respected academics who also began to see the similar sort of patterns. So, brand differentiation, price sensitivity becoming a bigger issue. The percentage of people who said that they were loyal to one brand had declined from 40% to 9% in literally 6 years. Now, we also looked at the valuation of some of the major brand studies, and we compared them between BAV and Interbrand. We saw some big differences. It started to tell us that even as brand value was increasing, differentiation was not improving in nearly 85% of all the brands in BAV. So something was going on, and this became sort of we call it in the United States, a canary in the coal mine, a signal of a warning that something was not right. And just as the book came out in 2008, the market collapsed. That was great for our research integrity, but bad for book sales. As the recession took hold, people started to really fundamentally change their behaviors. There was a lot of issues with corruption on Wall Street and protests. This is a sign of that type of protest that happened. We also saw the failure of regulators. So in a society where there was assumption of trust, regulators from Moody's and Standard & Poor's all the way down to government agencies in charge of food quality were beginning to fail in the expectation of the market, of the ordinary marketplace. We also had this strange phenomenon where taxpayers became shareholders in companies. Suddenly we owned a percentage of AIG and of Citibank. And then lastly, there was tremendous egregious behavior. This is from New York Magazine, and it has dressed up Bernie Madoff in the image of the Joker. So this time over the past 2 years became very, very difficult for most people. $13 trillion of wealth had evaporated. Housing foreclosures spread across the United States and in many parts of Europe, and people were out of work. Unemployment reached nearly 10%, and in places like Detroit, where I did some research for my new book, unemployment was as high as 25%. In fact, today, the average value of a house in downtown Detroit is $18,000. So we wanted to understand in a much deeper way what is happening with the crisis and how it was impacting people's values and attitudes and behaviors. So we turned to BAV, and we did a series of recession surveys, special surveys to understand how people were adapting to the crisis and how companies were connecting to the new mindset. One of the first things we found is that there was a trust virus that was infecting many categories of products and services. This is US data, but we would have expected that the financial industry we wouldn't trust as much, and the automotive industry that we might not trust as much. But here we found declines in 1 year across a range of different industries, from packaged goods to automotive, film, entertainment, and so forth. The other thing we found is we looked at BAV and we rank ordered what are the most important things that consumers look for in a brand across the entire brands that we have in our study. And not surprisingly, the first thing is high quality. I'm looking for a high quality brand from a high quality company. The second most important thing they're looking for is trust. That's at the top on those very small green bars you can't read. At the bottom, though, we looked at the correlation to differentiation and trust. And we actually found the exact opposite, that trust was way down at the bottom of impacting brand differentiation. And the takeaway that we got from this was that people just expected to trust brands. Now, that was up until the crisis. After the crisis, trust became a very important element